Cybersecurity Conference by SISAP. The future begins with security.
Con nosotros el día de hoy está Richard Williamson, que es un experto en ingeniería de aplicaciones con una sólida trayectoria en entornos técnicos de alto nivel, abarcando áreas clave como seguridad de la información y la criptografía aplicada, con más de 20 años de experiencia internacional en Europa y África. Ha trabajado en soporte técnico en ventas en entornos multiculturales y multilingües. Su experiencia abarca el soporte de software en múltiples niveles, desde sistemas operativos en tiempo real, R2, hasta entornos empresariales Windows y middleware de distribución de datos. Actualmente desempeña el papel clave para los módulos de seguridad de hardware en Utimaco, a quienes agradecemos muchísimo habernos presentado a Richard para que nos pueda acompañar. Sus especialidades incluyen el trabajo directo con clientes en entornos altamente regulados, la gestión de soluciones técnicas complejas y el conocimiento profundo de tecnologías de seguridad informática. Richard, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for being with us. And I'm sure that the bio that I just read is very, very short and does not make justice to all the things that you have done in your life. So maybe you could give us a little additional of your experience in the theme that brings us here today, which is post-quantum cryptography.
Certainly. Good afternoon. The weirdest thing about me is that I've actually had more street addresses, places that I've lived, than years that I've been alive. So it's very possible that at some point during my life, I lived around the corner from you. So my exposure to post-quantum cryptography has come as a result of being one of the engineers at Utimaco. I've been here for 10 years. I am trained, obviously, on RSA and elliptic curve. And then the idea of the quantum computer comes around and the various ways that those could attack those algorithms. So for me, this is really about, what's next? If RSA and elliptic curve go away, then what can we do to protect our secrets? So,
there's a lot of noise or chatter in the media about the quantum computers being able to decrypt everything that we currently have, apparently very safe with current algorithms and what we are going to do about it. So let's start at the very beginning, at a very, very high level. How do current algorithms, cryptographical algorithms or traditional cryptography work?
Okay, so when you look at an asymmetric algorithm being used on just a normal computer, the way they work is via what's referred to as a one-way function. It's easy to do one thing. It's very hard to undo that one thing. For example, RSA is based on taking two very large prime numbers and multiplying them together. That's easy. Any computer can do that. If you start from the value of what they are when they're multiplied together and try to get back to those prime numbers to figure out what was multiplied together, that is difficult. And using a standard computer, it will take years or decades or eons. You're talking hundreds of thousands of years to decrypt a single key or to determine what a single key was. And then elliptic curve is similar, but it's not using factored numbers, it's using discrete logarithms. Another one-way function, which is easy to do in one direction, but very difficult to do in the other direction. Quantum computers bypass that. They don't try to do the factoring. They use a different methodology to look at the all the possible answers. And the easiest way to describe it is that should you have a quantum computer with sufficient stable qubits, to use the term, it's possible for the answer to fall out of the input. It does not immediately decrypt the key, but it does give you a much smaller search space to find the key. And that's where the quantum computers come into play. One of the assumptions about quantum computers that people have is that they're going to be using quantum computers to be doing cryptographic operations, when the reality is that people are going to be using cryptographic or quantum computers to break cryptography. So that's what we're trying to protect against now, is the assumption that a one-way function is not breakable goes away when you think about cryptographically relevant quantum computers.
Without going into the depths of subatomic particles and stuff, how does the quantum computer work? How does the qubit or the theory behind that?
The theory behind it. So in classical computers, everything is based on the bit. It's either true or false. It's 0 or 1. There is a strict split between the one value at one end and the one value at the other end. With a quantum computer, they no longer look at true or false or 0 or 1. They look at all the values in between. And when you start looking at things as a field rather than as a true or a false, it is possible for inspection of the field to give you answers that a brute force attack, for example, brute force will never get there. But if you expand it into a field of different answers, it's possible that you will be able to compute the answer from that field. So it's not, quantum computers or ordinary computers do things one at a time. Even if it's doing it very fast, it's still only doing one thing at a time. With quantum computers, they do all the things at once. And it's difficult to interpret the answer. We're not quite sure yet whether people will be able to build quantum computers which are large enough to be able to factor an RSA key, but it's getting close. And as soon as that happens, existing RSA encrypted data is going to go away or will be exposed.
That's frightening, because all our security basically is based on RSA security, or at least the commercial part of the cryptography, right? So yes. I understand that there's an algorithm called Shor's, the factoring algorithm that really exploits the power of quantum computing to make it really fast. I do not want to go into the details of Shor's algorithm, but I understand it's quite easy to see it, understand it at a very, very high level, but implementation is very difficult. Is that so?
Yeah, there's actually two algorithms that are being used right now. When people talk about quantum computers being used to break cryptography, they talk about Shor's algorithm and they talk about Grover's algorithm. Shor's algorithm directly attacks the fundamental properties of multiplication or factoring, so RSA keys, and discrete logarithms, so elliptic curve keys. Grover's algorithm, on the other hand, reduces the search space for a database index by about a factor of 2. So if you need to brute force a small key and it's going to take you a certain amount of time, a Grover's algorithm running on with sufficiently strong quantum computer, or sufficiently stable quantum computer, reduces that by a factor of 2. Grover is easy to defeat. You simply double the size of your symmetric key. So if you're using AES 128, use AES 256. Grover reduces that back to AES 28 strength, but a classical computer still would take hundreds of thousands of years to brute force an AES 128 key. So we won't worry about that one. But Shor's algorithm directly attacks the underpinnings of the two asymmetric algorithms that we're currently using. And if they can put together a sufficiently stable, sufficiently long-lived quantum computer with a sufficient number of stable qubits, then Shores will effectively give you the answer to the question, what is the private key given this public key and this signature? It will say, well, the private key is this. And if it's literally that fast, then someone can take your data, which has been encrypted. Usually what happens is they harvest a data stream. So you're chatting with somebody over the internet and you're sending data back and forth over an encrypted channel. That encrypted channel will have done a key agreement using a pair of asymmetric keys, and they arrive at a shared secret, which is then used as part of the key. If someone harvests that entire data stream, they have the key agreement at the front, meaning they have the public keys for the two, either elliptic curve or RSA keys. And with that, they can put those into their quantum computer, figure out what the private keys were, regenerate the shared secret, and then decrypt the stream. So that's what most people lie awake worried about right now, is the fact that there's these massive data farms where they are basically capturing everything they can that goes across the internet and just storing it for later, under the assumption that at some point a nation state actor will have sufficiently large quantum computer to be able to decrypt any of the streams that they captured.
Okay, wow. That's interesting. So how fast is that development of quantum computing going? Because we hear that Google has a chip, and then we hear that IBM has this computer, et cetera, et cetera.
So noise about quantum computing, we'll use noise, term of art. Noise about quantum computing really started about 5 years ago. And 5 years ago, the first quantum computers probably had 10 or 12 stable qubits, and that was a big number. I think that the last one that I saw that was publicly announced was 56 or possibly 64, which seems like a lot compared to 12. But for a critically relevant one, the number being bandied about is somewhere in the range of 1,000 qubits. Once they have 1,000 qubits, they can start really working on breaking RSA and elliptic curve. And those are 1,000 stable, long-lived qubits. Quantum computers have to be chilled down to almost absolute zero so that there is no quantum noise in the system, because quantum noise causes the qubits to coherence. They lose coherence and they fall apart. And once that happens, then they have to start over. And so they have to have a system which lasts long enough to be able to attack a key. And the question about how long is it going to take before they have those 1,000 qubits, I will use a common overworked phrase. It's going to happen gradually, and then it's going to happen suddenly. So in my mind, now that they can generate probably around 100 qubits, going from a factor of 100 to 1,000 probably is little more than just a manufacturing problem. They understand the science, they understand the techniques. They just have to start building the underpinnings of a new qubit in with such fine detail that it is stable for a long time. And once they can do that, then turning out new qubit infrastructure, and you'll have a 100 qubit quantum computer, and then you'll have a 200 bit, then you'll have a 400 bit, and then you'll have an 800 bit. It very much follows Moore's law. Every 18 months, you can assume it will double. Using that, going from 64 to 1,000 really isn't that long. You're looking at 10 to 15 years.
Okay. what other applications are there for quantum computing, apart from trying to break or increase the speed in searches?
Yeah. So now we have to go a bit further afield. There's a thing called protein folding, and protein folding is where it's very easy to look at a protein and you'll see it all folded up, and the scientists will look at it with a scanning tunneling microscope, and they'll see this protein which is all folded up. And they have the precursors which are flat. And all this, so there's a process where those proteins will fold into some form of useful compound. And we do this in pharmaceutical. How do you turn the precursors for a compound into a drug? A lot of that is based on protein folding. And a lot of that protein folding is currently hit or miss. You have to have the correct temperatures, you have to have the correct humidity, you have to have the correct inputs, the correct compounds going into the bath that is going to turn out these proteins. If they knew how it worked to go from the flat protein to the folded protein, it's much simpler to get higher yields and get better, more efficacious drugs out of this. So quantum computers are going to be used to do protein folding, and it will tell them how do we stabilize that process to make it repeatable. That's just one application. There are a lot of good, really, human advancing things that you can do with quantum computing. Unfortunately, it also lends itself to bad things, such as breaking cryptography.
Right. So who should be in our world, in our let's say private and non-private state world of cybersecurity? Who should be worried about what's coming and what should be we starting to plan out to do?
Well, who should be worried? Everybody. Who needs to be really worried? Well, that's a smaller subset of that. Everybody needs to pay attention to it. But the majority of people can't do anything about it because they're either not in the business or they just passive users of cryptography. People who browse the internet, they should worry about it because they're probably, renting a hotel room or buying a plane ticket or something over the internet. And if that process becomes compromised, then basically the entire financial system that the world is based on becomes a target. So the people who need to worry about it now are the people who are working in the business, are aware of what cryptography is and what it's used for, and from that looking at how can we replace the current cryptographic primitives, RSA, elliptic curve, with quantum safe alternatives that do not lend themselves to being broken by a quantum computer. Those algorithms now do exist. The U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology, so NIST, has standardized on 3 or 5 algorithms, depending on how you count them. And these algorithms are not running on quantum computers. They're running in standard computers, just everyday computers. And this allows you as an implementer to take those algorithms, put them into your stack, and make use of them to replace or to supplement the existing cryptography. Probably what you'll see is supplementing, which means both RSA and elliptic curve and one of these quantum safe algorithms will be used at the same time. And eventually the classical computational cryptography algorithms will simply go away and not be used anymore. There's a thing called Mosca's theorem, which says that it basically tells you when do you start needing to worry about quantum cryptography. And Mosca's theorem says if you take how important is your data, how long is that data need to be encrypted for, how strong is the encryption you're using, and when do you expect a quantum computer to be available that will break that crypto? And when you use this formula, it will tell you kind of, not exact dates, but it will give you ranges of, how much time do you have to start implementing quantum safe algorithms in order to re-encrypt the data that you need stored safely before someone has the ability to decrypt the current encryption keys.
Okay. And
I mean, that's a long-winded way of saying it kind of tells you when you need to start. And most people are looking at their data and the relevance to their company, and they're starting now.
They're starting now.
Unimaco's been talking about it. Yeah, they're starting now. Unimaco's been talking about it for 5 years. We started having symposiums 5 years ago, and most companies would send cryptographers the first couple of years, and then later they would send less cryptography, more implementation, so engineers. And now they're sending business people and executives, because the executives are the ones who have to make the decisions that, yes, now we are going to go and protect ourselves from quantum threat.
So I would imagine there's a process of making an inventory of all your data and deciding how to go about this change of algorithms.
So what you're referring to is the key inventory, and any migration from a classical, what you're using now, to a post-quantum secured environment, you have to start out with what keys are you using and what are those keys protecting. You have ephemeral keys, which are used now and immediately discarded. Yeah, you don't need to worry about those. Changing over to a post-quantum algorithm is probably going to be relatively, I won't say simple, but relatively straightforward. It's the more interesting things like databases full of personal information that you've collected, stuff that in Europe would be protected by GDPR, stuff in California protected by the California Consumer Protection Act. That kind of data, which has a long lifespan and has to be protected for the duration of that lifespan, and represents an existential risk to your corporation if it's exposed, that's the data you need to start worrying about now. Figure out what the first thing is and start on that, get that protected, and then just work your way down the list based on a priority of what's the most important to encrypt now. Don't try to encrypt your entire network immediately, because it won't work and things will get broken, and you run the risk of actually doing to yourself what you're worried about other people doing to you. You might not encrypt something you might decrypt something that needs to be encrypted and not realize you've decrypted it, because a lot of those systems are automatic. And then it's exposed, and then somebody might steal it. And so be methodical and just work your way through the problem.
Okay, so you talked about a number of algorithms that NIST already has, let's say, approved. How do you select which you're going to use?
Well, the first thing you would look at is the use case. So if somebody said, key agreement, then your options right now is a thing called ML-KEM, KEM, key encapsulation mechanism. ML means module lattice, so it's a lattice-based mathematical formula for doing a key agreement. And that is what people think is going to be replacing the Diffie-Hellman key exchange. Now, all browsers do a Diffie-Hellman key exchange in order to set up the initial HTTPS connection. And this will be the same thing, but it will use ML-KEM. And the underlying algorithm is lattice based on a tool called Kyber. And so you will have Kyber keys doing ML-KEM. And hopefully your browser needs to have one of these Kyber keys. Your systems, your backend have the Kyber keys. Both sides need key agreement. At that point, from that point, you're back to just using an AES key that has been agreed, and so the process just remains the same from that point. But it's that initial key agreement, you're going to use ML-Chem. If you are doing document signing, or you're signing, we'll stick with document signing first. So in America, it's probably worldwide now, a thing called DocuSign. So an online signing service, the factura, I believe is the term. So digital invoicing that needs to be signed. There's an algorithm for that, which is called dilithium, also known as MLDSA, Digital Signing Authority for module lattice. That's another one of the NIST standards. So dilithium will be used or MLDSA will be used to replace both RSA and elliptic curve in signing operations. For signing firmware, if you're writing code or you're developing hardware and you have hardware designs that you need to digitally sign, there's an option to use dilithium for that. There's another option which is referred to as LMS, which is just using the standard digest formula, so hash-based. LMS and XMSS are similar, but they have some peculiarities that make them more interesting to work with from a standpoint of data security. So I would avoid them simply because there's some added headaches there. Right now, those are the 5. There's another one called Sphinx Plus, which is been approved by NIST for use. However, it has not really made it into the market yet much. So there's not very many hardware security modules or crypto libraries or things like that which do Sphinx Plus. Everyone, all the PQ enabled libraries can do MLDSA and ML-Chem. We're starting to see more LMS and XMSS, but the Sphinx Plus is still taking its time to get out into the market.
Okay, if you have a let's say up-to-date HSM, do all these new algorithms will be able to store keys there, or do you have to upgrade or change completely the HSM?
So because the algorithms themselves are just software, theoretically updating the HSM firmware to a firmware package which includes the algorithms would be sufficient. So in the general case, you don't need to upgrade your hardware. There may be specific cases where you might want to upgrade the hardware. For example, if new hardware actually has hardware assisted or accelerated versions of those algorithms. In that case, moving to a faster box can benefit. It's not really what I would call necessary. I mean, it's not. There isn't anybody forcing you to buy new hardware to run these algorithms. The hardware already, just a standard CPU can do the algorithms. It's just a question of whether it can do it quickly or, how much time does it take? There is not much data on that yet. How fast do these algorithms run? So there's a lot of data on how fast RSA works and how fast elliptic curve works, but all these new algorithms, people are still, under these environments, under these circumstances, it runs this fast. Let's compare that to something else. It's kind of nobody has numbers yet.
Okay. I think I have a last question. And are you getting requests from groups of companies like chambers of commerce or something like that, or specific companies to do a assessment of where you are and what you would recommend for them to start, or where to start their migration to the new algorithms?
Yes. Yeah, so Utimaco, as a provider of HSMs, we can help you with those keys, but we're not really going to be helping you find where those keys are being used in your environments. We do, however, have partners that we work with who will do a cryptographic key inventory. They will help you do the risk assessment for where or which keys need to be, or which use cases need to be addressed early versus which use cases can simply be pushed down the road and ignored because the relevance of the data is going to be gone before anybody can decrypt the keys. But yeah, we work with third-party companies to do the crypto inventory. Usually it's someone who's closer to where you are, because it's much easier to work with local teams who are aware of your own regional requirements than it is for you to Mako to do the crypto inventories.
Okay.
We don't know where you're using it, and it is rather invasive to do a crypto inventory. And I would honestly suggest that you don't want your HSM vendor doing that inventory, because we know who it is that use our equipment, and there's always that case that it's going to be the same team doing an inventory on you as they're doing on one of your competitors. And so there's always that thing going on in the background where you're worried about, okay, you're gathering all of this really intrusive, invasive information that is really effectively your company's, it's the stuff you make money on. You're giving it to us, and now we're also talking to your competitor and doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And there's always a chance that we might leak information, not even realize we're doing it. And so we'd rather not do that.
Okay.
So what we do is we try to introduce you to local partners who you have a better feel for the questions that they're asking. And you know that the HSM vendor isn't going to cause issues.
Okay, fantastic. So let me see if there are questions. Yes, there are some questions from the audience. Let me see. Thank you. The question is, what can you tell us about harvest now, decrypt later, and how criminals are keeping encrypted data so that later, when the technology is available, this information can be decrypted?
Yeah. So I alluded that to earlier. That's the first attack vector that we see that's currently already happening. And this is where, and it's usually not criminals, unfortunately, it's nation states. So it's the large countries who have both the space and the money to set up a data center full of hard drives. And they probably also control internet traffic coming into and out of their country, so they can put a wiretap on it and just capture everything. The first problem there is that everything is an awful lot, and they have to filter it down to what they think might be relevant in the future. They have to capture the actual thing that they're looking for. So they would have to filter it down to specific people of interest, companies of interest, things like that. But they then capture anything they can find coming or going to that entity. That goes into a database and it just sits there. That's the harvest now part. They're just harvesting data. And they stick it in a database and then they go harvest more data. The assumption is that at some point, someone will have a cryptographically relevant quantum computer with sufficient long-lived stable qubits to be able to look at the public key exchange that resulted in the keys that encrypted that stream, look at the public keys, look at just the public information, and from that and the computer and the quantum computer derive what the private keys are. Once they have the private keys, then they can decrypt the entire key handshake, get the shared secret, from that derive the encryption key for the stream, and then decrypt the stream. Hard drive space is cheap. Running a data center, yes, it's expensive, but we're talking about nation state actors. They can afford it. And so they set up these data farms, they capture all the data, and they're assuming that later they will have the ability to decrypt the key handshakes, redo the key handshakes to get the encryption keys.
Right. Another question. How easy is it to maintain a qubit stable? It is more easily to create security keys than break the keys in quantum computers. I say this because to make key uses quantum entanglement that controls if someone what they break the key. I didn't understand that part of the question, but let's start with the first
I did. Yeah, I got it. Yeah, so quantum entanglement is the process or the technique where the qubits are actually creating information out of just raw data. And the entanglement is what I mean when I say stable and long-lived. It's that entanglement between two qubits, which is stable. And if that stability is lost, the qubits, they're no longer entangled, and whatever it was that they were doing has to be started over. And the problem is that these qubits and these entangled qubits literally just quantum random vibrations. You know, people talk about chaos theory that starts with a butterfly flapping its wings in the Amazon, which results in tornadoes in the North Atlantic just through the sequence of events. Well, in a quantum computer, if that butterfly thinks about flapping its wings, it could cause a decoherence of the stable qubits, thus destroying the field and making it impossible to get the answer. So that's why they cool everything down close to absolute zero in order to minimize vibrations around the entire setup, so that there's nothing happening. There's no movement, nothing, no temperature changes, no humidity changes. All of that is controlled as much as possible, because if just a vibration passes through the field, it could decoherentize. I don't know if that's a word, but it can cause the entire field to collapse, and then you've got nothing and have to start over. Okay. So that's probably where they're targeting right now. If they can fix that problem, then it's much easier to keep the qubits stable in their coherent state, and then the fields will last long enough for the algorithms to actually run to completion.
Is that what they mean when they are introducing quantum computers with error correction? Or this is another thing? Yes? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so error correction means the ability to re-entangle those qubits after they've gone decoherent. So right now they're either up or down. We're back to the quantum or the non-quantum bit. It's either good or bad. Right. With error correction, it's sort of everything in the middle, because they can error correct and reconnect those quantum bit qubits, get them stable again, and just sort of keep doing that. And if they can keep the field up, even if parts of it are going down, if they can bring it back up and keep it going long enough, then the answer will fall out of it. But it's really difficult, and it's going to be somebody's going to have a manufacturing change. It really, like I said, the concepts are sound, the understanding of how it should work is known. They have people looking at it all the time. Where I think that humanity breaks down is in the ability to actually build things with the tolerances necessary to be able to put them into play where they don't themselves cause these decoherent field collapses. And as we get better and better at that manufacturing phase, more qubits become stable, the field gets bigger, the field is alive longer or lasting longer, and eventually somebody has one which is cryptographically relevant.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Okay, the question is, no, I'll go to another one. What can or should be regulated by governments, and will it be enforceable?
So historically, if you look at government attempts to regulate crypto, usually what they're trying to do is force you to not use crypto because it makes their job that much more difficult.
Right.
And by job, I mean tracking criminals, trying to find fraudulent payments, those kinds of things. If everything is encrypted, it makes it very difficult for them to follow the money. So on the other hand, what the government can do is give the marketplace a fixed list of algorithms, because if you look at the NIST process for determining post-quantum algorithms, it started out with some 80 different algorithms, 80. And if there are 80 viable algorithms, just look at the problems we've had with people deciding whether they wanted to use RSA or elliptic curve for a given use case. Browsers all support both RSA and elliptic curve. However, over time, they seem to have standardized on elliptic curve, and specifically the Edwards curves. That's what I expect to happen. The government will say, these you can use, and then the market will decide within that set which one is best for which use case. But until somebody like the government says, yeah, use these, the market is going to be all over the place. And you'll have databases that you can't talk to, or browsers that won't talk to backend servers, or servers that won't talk to each other because they're using different variants of different flavors with different key sizes of different algorithms. And it's the Tower of Babel, and nobody will be able to understand anybody else. So there has to be some sort of standard defined about what we're going to use for interoperability. Usually this is not a government agency. Usually this is a standards body. For example, OASIS and PKCS11, or Java and the JCE, the Java Cryptographic Engine, or Java Cryptographic Extensions. Those are basically the market saying, this is what we will do. And then people have the choice of either using that or going someplace else. But if 70 or 80% of the world is using PKCS11, generally that's your market. You want to talk to those 70% of that 70% of the world. And so you should also be using PKCS11. It comes down to, what are your trading partners deciding on? Can you influence that? Can you just talk to them and say, we like this one, how do you feel about it? Eventually, the market will arrive at a consensus, is the easiest way to explain it.
Okay,
that
thanks.
said, there are still people using old algorithms.
A question that I think was answered already, but who do you believe, who do you believe is at most risk of having data exposed, and do you believe the necessary steps to prevent the risk could be taken in time by them?
I would start out with the financial industry. They have the most to lose, and it's very easy to compute how much they lost. From that, we move on to people who collect personal and private data of their users. Just a moment. And it's financial and personal data. If you're not doing anything with those, you have a grace period. That grace period is going to end when your trading partners tell you that you cannot continue to use the outdated algorithms. But the financial industry needs to start moving to post-quantum algorithms to protect their data. And then things like the medical field and online digital medical records. That all has to be protected. One thing to remember is that it's not just data, it's also systems. Most cars nowadays have more computers in them than the Apollo moonshots. And so if you have a car which is using older algorithms and can't be updated, you're going to have a problem. I'm not going to stir the pot or anything, but it's possible. Let's say it's possible for somebody to break the over-the-air update process for one type of vehicle. A manufacturer of a vehicle uses over-the-air updates to update the firmware on their vehicle, on the public vehicle fleet, and somebody takes control of that because they're able to use a quantum computer to break their keys. Now they can start loading whatever they want into everybody's car, and they could do serious damage if they do that. So it's like I said, it's not just the data, it's what's the data used for is also going to factor into who needs to start now.
And I would think absolutely the state, military, intelligence, those are possibly the first adopters in all this.
Yes. Yeah, they have the budgets, so they have the money.
Right.
But they're the ones who are going to need it. If you think about battlefield communication systems, if those are decrypted, it makes it very hard to be secret on the battlefield.
Right. Last question. When do you think we need to start migrating to post-quantum digital certificates?
So there's a thing called the PKI Consortium, PKIC, and they had a conference last week in Austin, Texas, about mostly about that subject. Moving to a post-quantum algorithm digital certificate is mostly going to be a problem of support for those certificates in things like browsers and digital signature authorities, timestamp authorities, and things like that. It's most likely the PKI consortium is going to be the one to define what those certificates are going to look like, what kind of data they will hold, how they will be formed. And at that point, what we'll see is that the major vendors of equipment who need to use those certificates will start to migrate their systems into being able to accept them or to be able to produce them. But I don't think we're there yet. It's very close. There are still groups of people who are rallied around specific algorithms. There's a thing called an X-Wing certificate. There are dual certificates. There are hybrid certificates. And the market seems to be narrowing it down to specific use cases now, that when we're doing this, we will use this type of certificate. And when that happens, we'll be able to, we as an HSM vendor will be able to supply the necessary low-level algorithms and primitives to be able to support the creation of those certificates. Right now, Utimaco's HSMs can do dilithium, FIPS 204, they can do Kuiper, FIPS 203, we can do LMS and XMSS. But I even saw something today where Utimaco can do something at the top end in our software, and we can do it in the low level bit. But there's 3 or 4 places in the middle where we can't do anything because there's no standard for it yet. We can't do anything with P11 because PKS 11 3.2 has not been released. EJBCA, a common certificate of authority software package, while it can do post-quantum algorithms and they have technology demonstrators that show how it works, they can't talk to an HSM because all of the HSM vendors have different ways of accessing those algorithms because, again, there's no standard because P11 hasn't released it yet. So it is a tornado of different issues that are all sitting there waiting for things to be finalized someplace else. And eventually something will be finalized and then everything else will start to cascade into place. And at that point, you'll be able to select, we're going to take this HSM, we're going to take this CA vendor, we're going to take this software, we're going to bang them together, and they're going to work. But we're not there yet.
Okay. Well, well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and definitely I appreciate the knowledge that you have been sharing with us. And as a summary, I would, for the audience, let's start looking at our data. Let's start looking at the relevance of our data, our longevity that is needed to keep it secure. And if needed, let's start giving the first steps or starting the first steps depending on the data. But we should not be waiting for the first news of people decrypting to start, because possibly we'll be rushing too late. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I'm changing to Spanish. Si ustedes tienen más preguntas, por favor, mándennoslas. Las estaremos tratando de contestar todas y les agradecemos mucho. Esperamos que podamos tenerlos el martes que viene en la siguiente sesión. So, Richard, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Cybersecurity Conference by SISAP. The future begins with security.